The blood-red Arizona sun dipped below the horizon as Grace Reynolds stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Ash Fork, clutching nothing but a worn leather satchel and the remains of a broken promise. It was 1878, and the frontier town sprawled before her like an uncertain future wooden buildings lining the main street, men in dusty hats lounging outside the saloon, and a single church spire piercing the darkening sky. "Last stop, madam," the driver called down, already busy with the mail pouches. Grace straightened her travel-worn dress and surveyed her new surroundings with wary eyes. At 22, she had already weathered more storms than most women twice her age. The letter from her aunt, offering her a position in the town's only millinery shop, had been a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. After the scandal in Boston, after everyone had turned their backs on her, this remote corner of the Arizona territory represented her only chance at starting over. "Need help with your bags?" asked a deep voice. Grace turned, startled to find a tall man regarding her with curious blue eyes. His face was sun-weathered beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she guessed him to be no more than 30. Unlike the other men loitering nearby, he wore no gun on his hip. "I have everything I need, thank you," she replied stiffly, turning away. Men had proven themselves untrustworthy in her experience, and she hadn't traveled 2,000 miles to repeat old mistakes. "Suit yourself, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Nathan Eastwood, if you find yourself needing anything." She merely nodded, watching him stride toward the livery stable, his spurs jingling with each step. His kindness seemed genuine, but Grace knew better than to trust first impressions. She had learned that lesson the hard way back east. The Ash Fork Ladies' Boarding House stood at the quieter end of town, a 2-story clapboard building with white curtains in every window. The proprietress, Mrs. Whittaker, was a stern-faced widow who laid out her rules like commandments while showing Grace to a tiny room on the second floor. "No gentlemen callers, no coming in after dark without prior arrangement, no spirits of any kind on the premises," she recited. "Most of my boarders are respectable shopgirls and teachers. I intend to keep it that way." Grace nodded gratefully. "You'll have no trouble from me, Mrs. Whittaker. I'm here to work and nothing more." "Good. Your aunt spoke highly of you in her letter, said you have quite the talent with a needle." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Martha has been waiting for your arrival. The poor dear's hands aren't what they used to be." "I'll do my best not to disappoint her," Grace promised. After unpacking her meager belongings, Grace sat by the window watching the street below. Ash Fork was nothing like Boston with its cobblestone streets and gas lamps. Here, the very air tasted of dust and possibility. Perhaps in this rough, edged place, no one would care about a woman's past mistakes. Perhaps here she could finally outrun the whispers. Her aunt's millinery shop, Martha's fashionable hats, occupied a narrow storefront between the general store and the post office. The bell jingled as Grace entered the next morning, and a small, bird-like woman looked up from her workbench. "Grace," Aunt Martha exclaimed, setting aside her feathers and ribbons to embrace her niece. "Look at you, all grown up and beautiful as your mother." Grace returned the hug, surprised at how frail her aunt felt beneath her shawl. "It's wonderful to see you, Aunt Martha." "Let me look at you," Martha said, stepping back to examine her niece with keen eyes. "The journey was tolerable, I hope?" "Long, but not unbearable," Grace replied diplomatically, omitting the unwanted advances from a drummer in St. Louis and the terrifying night when their coach nearly overturned in a flash flood. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters." Martha gestured to the shop around them. "Not quite the establishments you're used to in Boston, but we do well enough. The mines are producing, and even rough men like to see their wives in pretty things." Grace looked around at the modest shop with its display of bonnets, caps, and wide-brimmed hats. "It's lovely. And I'm eager to learn everything you can teach me." "Good, because my fingers aren't as nimble as they once were," Martha confessed. "Arthritis. The doctor says it's only getting worse." "Then I came just in time," Grace said with forced cheerfulness, hanging her shawl on a peg behind the counter. By midday, Grace had taken inventory of their supplies, reorganized the work area, and helped her aunt finish trimming a stylish bonnet for the banker's wife. The work was soothing, each stitch a small act of creation, each ribbon a decision she alone controlled. It was so different from the chaos of her life in Boston, where others had made the decisions that shattered her future. The bell above the door jingled, and Grace looked up to see a slender young woman about her own age enter the shop. Her calico dress was simple but well-made, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Olivia," Martha greeted her warmly. "Come to see if your hat is ready. If it's no trouble, Mrs. Reynolds," the woman replied. Her eyes fell curiously on Grace. "You must be the niece we've been hearing about. Grace Reynolds," she introduced herself, setting aside her work. "Recently arrived from Boston, Olivia Taylor. I teach at the schoolhouse." She extended her hand, which Grace shook. "It's not often we get newcomers from the East who stay more than a fortnight. Most find our little town too primitive for their liking." "I'm here to stay," Grace said firmly. "Ash Fork is my home now." Olivia smiled. "Well then, welcome. Perhaps you'd join me for Sunday services." "It's a good way to meet folks." Before Grace could respond, the shop door opened again. This time, the tall cowboy from the stage coach Nathan Eastwood, she recalled, stepped inside, removing his hat in one fluid motion. "Ladies," he greeted them, nodding respectfully. "Miss Taylor, Miss Reynolds." Grace stiffened. "You know my name," a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Small town, word travels fast when a Boston lady arrives to help her aunt. His eyes were kind, but Grace looked away quickly, focusing instead on Martha's workbench. "What can we do for you, Mr. Eastwood?" Martha asked. "Not in the market for a bonnet, I presume," he chuckled, a warm, pleasant sound. "Not today, madam. I'm here about the leak in your back room. Sheriff mentioned you've been having trouble." "Oh, yes," Martha sighed. "Every time it rains, which isn't often, thank the Lord, but when it does, my storage gets soaked through." "Mind if I take a look? I'm handy with repairs." Martha led him to the back of the shop while Grace watched suspiciously. When they were out of earshot, Olivia leaned closer. "He's one of the good ones," she whispered. "Owns the largest cattle spread north of town. Could have his pick of any unmarried woman in the county, but keeps to himself mostly." "I'm not interested," Grace said curtly. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Didn't say you should be." "Just offering information as one newcomer to another. I only arrived last year myself." Grace softened slightly. "I'm sorry, it's been a long journey." "I understand completely. When I first came from Denver, I was certain I'd made a terrible mistake." Olivia glanced toward the back room. "But Ash Fork has a way of growing on you. The people here look out for each other." Nathan returned to the front with Martha, already explaining what repairs were needed. "It's the flashing where the roof meets the wall. Water's getting in and running down inside." "I can fix it tomorrow if that suits you." "That would be wonderful," Martha said gratefully. "What do we owe you?" He waved off the question. "Nothing at all, madam, just being neighborly." His eyes flicked briefly to Grace, who pretended great interest in a spool of ribbon. "Besides, can't have Ash Fork's finest hats getting ruined by rainwater." After he left, Martha turned to Grace with a knowing smile. "Such a fine young man. His ranch is prospering, and he treats his hands fairly." "I didn't come to Arizona to find a husband," Grace said firmly. "Of course not, dear." Martha patted her hand. "You came to escape one." Grace's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Your mother wrote to me after. Everything. I know about Harold Smithfield and what happened." Olivia, sensing private matters, made her excuses and departed with her hat, promising to return for Grace on Sunday. When they were alone, Grace sank onto a stool. "Does everyone know?" "Goodness, no," Martha assured her. "Your mother only told me because she was desperate for my help." "Your secret is safe here, Grace. No one in Ash Fork knows or needs to know that you were engaged to a married man." Grace closed her eyes against the flood of memories. Harold's lies, the confrontation with his wife, the public humiliation when it all came crashing down. I didn't know he was married, she whispered. He told me his wife had died. Everyone believed him. He was so respected in Boston society. When she appeared at our engagement party, she shuddered at the memory. I became the scandal of the season. The naive girl who tried to steal another woman's husband. Martha took Grace's hands in her gnarled ones. That's behind you now. Arizona is a place for new beginnings. People here care more about who you are today than who you were yesterday. I'll never trust a man's words again, Grace vowed. Never, Martha sighed. That's your choice to make, but don't let one scoundrel rob you of happiness forever. The following weeks settled into a routine that brought Grace unexpected peace. By day, she worked alongside her aunt, learning the millinery trade and discovering she had a natural talent for design. The women of Ash Fork, starved for Eastern fashions, eagerly sought her creations. In the evenings, she kept to herself in the boarding house, reading or writing letters to her mother. True to his word, Nathan Eastwood fixed the leak in the shop's back room. He declined payment, but accepted a fresh apple pie that Martha insisted on baking for him. Grace had managed to be out making deliveries when he came, a coincidence that her aunt noted with raised eyebrows but didn't comment upon. Grace couldn't avoid him forever, though. Ash Fork might have been growing, but it was still a small frontier town where paths inevitably crossed. She encountered him at the general store, outside the bank, and once at the post office where he politely tipped his hat and asked after her aunt's health. Each time, Grace responded with cool politeness, ignoring the flutter in her chest when he smiled. She reminded herself sternly that charming men were the most dangerous kind. Harold had been charming too, right until the moment his deception was revealed. On Sundays, Grace attended church services with Olivia, who had become her first real friend in Ash Fork. The schoolteacher introduced her around town, helping Grace establish herself as more than just Martha's Boston niece. "You've made quite an impression," Olivia told her one Sunday after services. "Mrs. Patterson says your hat designs are finer than anything she saw in San Francisco." Grace smiled, pleased with the praise. "It feels good to build something of my own." They were walking back toward town when a commotion up ahead caught their attention. A crowd had gathered outside the telegraph office, and the atmosphere was tense. "What's happening?" Grace asked a nearby woman. "Apache raid on the Miller homestead last night," the woman replied grimly. "Killed Tom Miller and took his stock." Grace's heart sank. Though she'd been in Arizona territory for nearly 2 months, the threat of Indian attacks had seemed remote until now. "The Miller's place is only 10 miles from town," Olivia whispered, her face pale. Sheriff Dawson emerged from the telegraph office, raising his hands for quiet. "Folks, I've sent word to Fort Verde. The cavalry will be dispatched, but it might take them a day or two to get here." "A day or two?" A man shouted. "By then, those savages could hit any of our spreads." "I'm organizing a posse," the sheriff continued, ignoring the outburst. "We'll track them, try to recover the stolen horses at least. And what about justice for Tom Miller?" Someone else called. Nathan Eastwood stepped forward, his expression grim. "Justice won't bring Tom back, and charging after a war party half-cocked will just get more men killed." Some in the crowd muttered in agreement, while others scowled at his words. "Easy for you to say, Eastwood," a burly man sneered. "Your fancy ranch has enough hands to keep watch. The rest of us are sitting ducks." "I'm offering shelter to any outlying families who want it until this passes," Nathan replied evenly. "The main house and bunkhouse can accommodate a dozen more, and we have men standing guard day and night." The sheriff nodded gratefully. "That's a generous offer, Nathan. Anyone who doesn't feel safe should take him up on it." As the crowd dispersed, Grace found herself watching Nathan. There was something about the quiet way he'd offered help without bravado or seeking praise that spoke to his character. "Your cowboy has a good heart," Olivia remarked, following Grace's gaze. "He's not my cowboy," Grace protested. Olivia smiled knowingly. "Perhaps not yet." The following day, Martha was unusually quiet in the shop, her fingers fumbling with the feathers she was attaching to a hat. "Is something wrong?" Grace asked, concerned. Martha sighed, setting down her work. "The Apache troubles have me worried. My friend, Eliza Jenkins, lives alone on a small plot outside town. She was at church yesterday, but I haven't seen her today. Could we send someone to check on her?" The sheriff's tied up with the posse, and most men are either with him or watching their own properties. Martha twisted her handkerchief anxiously. "In normal times, I'd ask Nathan, but he's likely busy with all those families he's sheltering." "I could go," Grace offered impulsively. "It's not far, is it?" Martha looked horrified. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous for a woman alone." The bell above the door jingled, and as if summoned by their conversation, Nathan Eastwood walked in. "Good morning, ladies," he said, removing his hat. His gaze lingered on Grace for a moment before turning to Martha. "Mrs. Reynolds, I wanted to check if you're comfortable staying in town, or if you'd prefer to move out to my ranch until things settle." "That's very kind of you, Nathan," Martha said, "but I'm too old to be picking up and moving about. Besides, Grace is with me now." He nodded, his eyes returning to Grace. "The offer extends to both of you, of course. We're perfectly safe in town," Grace said coolly. "Actually," Martha interjected, "there is something you might help with." "My friend Eliza Jenkins, say no more," Nathan interrupted gently. "I was heading that direction anyway. I'll stop by her place and make sure she's all right." Relief washed over Martha's face. "Thank you, Nathan. You're a good man." After he left, Martha gave Grace a pointed look. "You see, that's the kind of man worth trusting." "One good deed doesn't make him trustworthy," Grace muttered, though her conviction wavered. The Apache threat loomed over Ash Fork for the next week. The sheriff's posse returned empty-handed, and the cavalry arrived only to report that the war party had likely retreated into the mountains. Gradually, the tension eased as days passed without further incident. Eliza Jenkins had been fine, merely delayed in town visiting another friend, but Nathan's willingness to check on her had made an impression on Grace that she couldn't easily dismiss. One evening, as Grace closed up the shop alone, Martha had gone home early with a headache. The door opened just as she was about to lock it. "I'm sorry, we're closed," she began, then stopped when she saw Nathan standing there. "My apologies," he said, stepping back. "I can return tomorrow." "No, it's all right," she found herself saying. "What do you need?" He hesitated, then said, "My foreman's wife is expecting their first child next month. I wanted to get her something special. Thought a new bonnet might be nice." Grace was surprised. Few men would think of such a gift. "That's thoughtful of you. She's been a godsend at the ranch, keeping the books and feeding a bunkhouse full of cowboys. Deserves something pretty." Grace gestured him inside and relocked the door. "Do you know what style she prefers?" "I'm afraid that's beyond my expertise," he admitted with a smile. "Something practical but nice enough for church, I suppose." As Grace showed him several options, she found herself warming to his presence. Unlike Harold, who had been all polished words and practiced charm, Nathan had an unaffected genuineness about him. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to her explanations about different materials and styles. "You know a lot about hats," he observed as she wrapped his selection. "I've learned quickly. Aunt Martha is a good teacher. And Boston society provided plenty of examples, I imagine." Grace stiffened. "Yes, well, that life is behind me now." He leaned against the counter, studying her with those perceptive blue eyes. "Why did you leave?" "If you don't mind my asking." She busied herself tying the package with string. "It wasn't by choice. Sometimes circumstances force our hand." "I understand that better than most," he said quietly. Something in his tone made her look up. "You're not from Arizona originally?" "Kentucky. Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." The war had ended 13 years ago, she calculated. He must have been very young when he fought. "What brought you all the way to Ash Fork?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. "A desire to build something that was mine alone." He straightened, taking the wrapped package. "Thank you for staying open for me, Miss Reynolds." "You're welcome, Mr. Eastwood." He paused at the door. "Would you allow me to escort you home? It's getting dark." Her first instinct was to refuse, but caution gave way to practicality. The streets weren't entirely safe after dark, especially with the recent tensions. "That would be appreciated," she said, reaching for her shawl. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the setting sun painting the dusty streets gold. Grace found herself stealing glances at his profile, noting the small scar near his temple and the way he carried himself straight-backed but not rigid. "Your aunt tells me you're quite the artist with needle and thread," he said eventually. "Aunt Martha exaggerates, but I do enjoy creating beautiful things." "Nothing wrong with beauty in a harsh land," he observed. "Gives people hope." They reached the boarding house steps too quickly for Grace's liking, though she would never have admitted it aloud. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Eastwood." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "After all, we're practically neighbors in this small town." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Nathan. Good night, Grace." Her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. Inside, Mrs. Whittaker gave her a knowing look. "That's a fine man, Miss Reynolds, not one to trifle with a woman's affections." "We're merely acquaintances," Grace insisted, climbing the stairs to her room. But as she prepared for bed, she found herself remembering the timbre of his voice saying her name and wondering what it might be like to trust again. Summer arrived in force, bringing blistering heat that drove customers into the millinery shop as much for the shade as for the hats. Grace had gradually taken over more of the business as Martha's arthritis worsened, and she found herself enjoying the responsibility. Her designs were becoming known throughout the county, and they'd even received orders from as far away as Prescott. She saw Nathan occasionally at church, in the general store, or passing on the street. Each time, he greeted her warmly but respectfully, never pressing for more than she seemed willing to give. It was a courtesy she appreciated, even as she found herself looking forward to their brief encounters. One sweltering afternoon, a commotion outside drew Grace to the shop window. A wagon had overturned in the middle of the street, spilling crates and barrels across the dust. The driver was pinned beneath, shouting in pain. Without thinking, Grace rushed outside. Several men were already lifting the wagon while others pulled the injured driver free. Nathan was among them, his shirt darkened with sweat as he strained against the heavy vehicle. Once the man was clear, Nathan knelt beside him, examining his leg with careful hands. "It's broken, but clean. You'll be all right, Jim." The town doctor arrived moments later, and Nathan helped carry the injured man to his office. Grace returned to the shop, but her concentration was shattered. The image of Nathan's strength, his immediate response to someone in need, stayed with her. That evening, a knock at the boarding house parlor interrupted Grace's reading. Mrs. Whittaker appeared at the doorway. "You have a visitor, Miss Reynolds, Mr. Eastwood." Grace's heart quickened as she smoothed her skirts and followed the landlady to the front porch, where Nathan waited, hat in hand. He'd changed his shirt and combed his hair, she noticed. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Not at all. Is the wagon driver all right?" "Doc says he'll heal." "Might walk with a limp, but he's lucky it wasn't worse." Nathan shifted slightly. "I actually came with an invitation. My ranch is hosting a barn dance this Saturday, harvest celebration. I'd be honored if you'd attend as my guest." The request caught her off guard. A public event, with Nathan as her escort, would signal something to the town that Grace wasn't sure she was ready for. "I'm not much for dancing," she hedged. "Then you can keep my sister company. She's visiting from Kentucky and hardly knows anyone." His eyes held hers. "Please." "It would mean a great deal to me." The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses. "All right, thank you for the invitation." His smile was worth her momentary discomfort. "I'll come for you at 6 on Saturday if that's agreeable." After he left, Grace sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. She was playing a dangerous game with her heart, she knew. opening herself to friendship, perhaps more, with a man she still knew so little about. But something about Nathan Eastwood made her want to take that risk. Martha was delighted when Grace told her about the invitation. "I knew he had his eye on you. We must make you a new dress immediately." "Aunt Martha, it's just a barn dance, not a Boston ball," Grace protested, but couldn't help being caught up in her aunt's excitement. They spent the next few days creating a simple but elegant dress of cornflower blue calico that complemented Grace's eyes. While they worked, Martha shared stories of her own courtship many years earlier. "Your Uncle James was the most stubborn man I ever met," she recalled fondly. "Took him 3 months to work up the courage to ask me to a church social, but once he made up his mind, there was no changing it. Loved me steadfast for 42 years. "How did you know he was the one?" Grace asked, genuinely curious. Martha considered this. "I didn't, not at first. Love isn't always a thunderbolt, dear. Sometimes it's a slow dawning, like the sun coming up over the mountains. One day, you just look around and realize the light has changed everything." Grace thought about her failed engagement to Harold. That had been a thunderbolt, intense, exciting, and ultimately destructive. Perhaps there was wisdom in Martha's slower approach. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a mercifully cooler breeze. Grace spent extra time on her appearance, pinning her dark hair into a simple but becoming style and adding a touch of rose water to her wrists. Nathan arrived precisely at 6, looking handsome in clean denims and a white shirt with a string tie. His eyes widened appreciatively when Grace appeared. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Mrs. Whittaker, watching from her rocking chair, nodded approval. "Have her back by 11, Mr. Eastwood." "Yes, madam," he promised solemnly. Nathan's wagon was clean, the seat covered with a blanket for comfort. As they drove out of town, Grace felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "I should warn you," he said. "My sister Abigail has been pestering me with questions about you since she arrived. She has strong opinions about everything." "I look forward to meeting her," Grace replied, genuinely curious about Nathan's family. The Eastwood ranch sprawled across a valley north of town, more impressive than Grace had imagined. A large 2-story house stood on a gentle rise, while outbuildings and corrals spread below it. Lanterns illuminated the barnyard, where tables had been set up and a space cleared for dancing. Already, dozens of people milled about, and a small band was tuning instruments on a makeshift stage. Nathan helped Grace down from the wagon, his hand warm around hers. "Welcome to Eastwood Ranch," he said with a hint of pride. A slender woman with Nathan's blue eyes and a determined chin approached them immediately. "So this is the famous Grace Reynolds," she said, her smile wide and welcoming. "I'm Abigail Eastwood. My brother has mentioned you in every letter for the past 2 months." "Abby," Nathan warned, but his sister merely laughed. "Don't worry, I won't embarrass you. Much." She linked her arm through Grace's. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone while my brother sees to the horses." Over the next hour, Abigail guided Grace through a whirlwind of introductions to ranch hands and their families, neighboring farmers, and various townspeople who'd made the journey out. Everyone was friendly, many complimenting Grace on her hats or asking if she could design something special for them. "You've made quite an impression on Ash Fork," Abigail observed as they sampled the abundant food laid out on long tables. "And on my brother," Grace blushed. "We're just friends." "Hum," Abigail said skeptically. "Nathan doesn't bring just friends to his harvest celebration. This is the first time he's invited a woman as his personal guest since buying this place 7 years ago." Before Grace could respond, the band struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving to the cleared space for dancing. Nathan appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Reynolds?" he asked, extending his hand. Despite her earlier protest about not being much of a dancer, Grace found herself nodding. Nathan led her onto the floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her other hand in his. "I should confess something," he said, as they began to move with the music. "I've been looking for an excuse to call on you properly for months." "Have you?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure as they twirled among the other dancers. "Since the day you stepped off that stagecoach, looking like you'd take on the whole territory single-handed if you had to." Grace laughed despite herself. "I was terrified that day. Couldn't tell it by looking at you. You had your chin up and fire in your eyes." His gaze softened. "Still do." They danced 2 more sets before taking a break for lemonade. The night air had cooled, and Nathan draped his jacket around her shoulders when he noticed her shiver. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" he asked. "Not the proper thing, I know, but I promise we won't go far from the party." Curiosity won out over propriety. "I'd like that." He led her up the gentle slope toward the main house, which looked even more impressive up close. A wide veranda wrapped around it, with rocking chairs positioned to catch the evening breeze. "It's beautiful," Grace said honestly. "Thank you. Took 3 years to build it the way I wanted. Every nail hammered with my own hands." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "You built this yourself," he nodded. "With help from my men for the heavy work, but I had a vision of what I wanted it to be. A home, not just a house." Grace ran her hand along the porch railing, feeling the smooth, well-crafted wood. "It must be wonderful to create something so lasting." "It is," he agreed quietly, "but a house is just lumber and nails without the right people to fill it." Their eyes met in the lantern light, and something unspoken passed between them. For a brief moment, Grace allowed herself to imagine belonging in a place like this, with a man like Nathan. He cleared his throat. "I should probably get you back to the dance before Mrs. Whitaker sends a search party." The moment broke, and Grace nodded, following him back down toward the barn. But something had shifted between them, a door cracked open that had previously been firmly shut. As the evening wound down, Nathan drove her back to town in comfortable silence, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear desert sky. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as they reached the boarding house. "It meant a great deal to me." "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to," Grace admitted. He helped her down from the wagon, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Grace, I'd like to call on you properly if you'd allow it." Her heart hammered in her chest. I need time, Nathan." He nodded, no disappointment visible in his expression. "Time you shall have. I'm not going anywhere." As autumn painted the landscape in muted golds and browns, Grace found herself spending more time with Nathan. He called at the shop regularly, sometimes with legitimate business, other times with transparent excuses that made Martha hide her smiles behind her hand. He brought Grace wildflowers he found on the range, took her on buggy rides into the hills on Sunday afternoons, and once surprised her with a book of poetry he'd ordered specially from a shop in Prescott. Each gesture was thoughtful rather than showy, speaking to his understanding of her rather than any desire to impress. Still, she kept a part of herself guarded. When conversation turned toward personal matters, she deflected questions about Boston and her life there. Nathan never pressed, but sometimes she caught a look of hurt in his eyes when she changed the subject abruptly. One crisp November day, Nathan invited Grace to a picnic by a stream that ran through his property. Martha, who had become his enthusiastic accomplice, practically pushed Grace out the door. "Take your time, dear," she said with a wink. "I can manage the shop perfectly well for one afternoon." The spot Nathan had chosen was idyllic, a grassy bank beside a clear stream, shaded by cottonwood trees that had turned brilliant yellow. He spread a blanket and unpacked a basket containing cold chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. "This is lovely," Grace said, settling onto the blanket. "I didn't realize there were such green places in Arizona." "The territory has its secret gardens if you know where to look," he replied, pouring coffee from a thermos. They ate companionably, talking about the ranch, the latest town gossip, and Martha's improving health. When the food was gone, Nathan leaned back against a tree trunk, his expression turning thoughtful. Grace, we've known each other for several months now, and there's something I need to say. Her guard immediately went up. Nathan, please let me finish. He took a deep breath. I care for you deeply, I think you know that, and I believe you have feelings for me too, though you've been careful not to show them. She looked down at her hands. It's not that simple. It can be, he said gently. But first, I need you to trust me enough to tell me what happened in Boston. What you're running from. The directness of his request startled her. She'd expected a declaration, perhaps even a proposal, not this piercing insight into her fear. I'm not running, she protested weakly. Grace. Just her name, spoken with such understanding that tears pricked at her eyes. You'll think less of me, she whispered. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. Try me. So she told him everything, meeting Harold at a literary society, his courtship, the engagement, and the devastating moment when his wife appeared at their engagement party. She described the scandal that followed, how former friends crossed the street to avoid her, how her father's business suffered, and how she finally fled to Arizona to escape the shame. I was such a fool, she concluded, wiping away tears. So desperate to believe I was loved that I ignored every warning sign. Nathan had listened without interruption, his hands steady around hers. You weren't a fool, Grace. You were deceived by a man who made deception his art. The shame belongs to him, not you. The world doesn't see it that way. A woman who's been compromised. You weren't compromised, he interrupted firmly. You were betrayed. There's a world of difference. His defense of her character touched Grace deeply. Even so, I promised myself I would never be so trusting again, never give anyone the power to hurt me that way. And yet here you are, trusting me with your story. His voice was soft, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, she admitted. Here I am. I have a confession too, he said after a moment. I've been in love with you since that first day at the stagecoach. You looked so brave and so alone, and all I wanted was to earn the right to stand beside you. Her breath caught. Nathan, I don't expect you to say it back. Not yet, but I want you to know that I would wait forever if that's what it took. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I've been waiting my whole life to find someone like you, Grace Reynolds. The sincerity in his eyes undid her final defenses. Years of carefully constructed walls crumbled as Grace acknowledged the truth she'd been fighting for months. She was falling in love with Nathan Eastwood. I'm afraid, she confessed. Not of you, but of believing again, of hoping. Hope is the bravest thing we can do in this life, he said. And you, Grace Reynolds, are the bravest woman I know. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I'm not asking for promises today, just permission to court you properly with your aunt's blessing and the town's knowledge. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that very much. The ride back to town was different from all their previous outings. Something had fundamentally shifted between them, a mutual acknowledgement of feelings too strong to ignore any longer. When Nathan helped her down from the wagon outside the millinery shop, his touch lingered, and Grace found herself reluctant to go inside. Martha took one look at her niece's face and broke into a wide smile. Well, it's about time, she said, shooing Nathan away. Go on now, young man. You can call on her tomorrow. That evening, Grace sat by her boarding house window, watching the stars appear one by one. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly hopeful about her future. Nathan wasn't Harold, he was honest, steady, and patient. He'd given her time and space, never pushing beyond what she was ready for. Perhaps it was possible to trust again after all. Word spread quickly through Ash Fork about Nathan Eastwood's courtship of Grace Reynolds. Most reactions were positive. Nathan was well respected, and Grace had earned her place in the community through hard work and kindness. A few raised eyebrows came from ladies who had set their caps for the handsome rancher themselves, but even they couldn't deny the couple seemed well matched. Olivia Taylor was delighted. "I knew it from the moment I saw you two in the same room," she told Grace over tea. "The way he looked at you like you were water in the desert." "Was it that obvious?" Grace asked, embarrassed. "Only to everyone with eyes," Olivia teased. "While you were busy pretending not to notice him, he couldn't keep his eyes off you." The winter of 1878 brought rare snowfall to northern Arizona. The millinery business slowed as people stayed close to home, but Grace used the time to create new designs and teach Martha's increasingly popular sewing classes. Nathan visited regularly, sometimes just to sit by the shop stove and discuss his plans for spring cattle drives. One snowy evening in early December, he arrived at the boarding house looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Would you walk with me?" he asked after greeting Mrs. Whittaker. "I know it's cold, but the snow is beautiful in the moonlight." Intrigued, Grace fetched her heaviest shawl and allowed him to wrap it around her shoulders. They strolled through the quiet streets, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Nathan led her to the small town square, where a large pine tree had been decorated for Christmas. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he said, stopping beneath the tree. "About what I want my life to be," Grace's heart quickened. "And what have you decided?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That no future makes sense without you in it." He dropped to one knee in the snow, and Grace gasped. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. "Grace Reynolds, I love you with every part of my being. You've brought light and purpose into my life that I never thought possible." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small diamond. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Grace's vision as she looked down at this man, who had patiently dismantled every barrier she'd built around her heart. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Nathan Eastwood, I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was witnessed only by the falling snow and the distant window lights of Ash Fork, the town that had given both of them a second chance. Martha wept with joy when they shared the news, immediately launching into wedding plans. "Spring," she declared, "when the desert blooms. It's the perfect time for new beginnings." Mrs. Whittaker insisted on hosting an engagement celebration at the boarding house, inviting half the town to toast the couple's happiness. Abigail Eastwood sent a telegram promising to return for the wedding and threatening dire consequences if they dared to proceed without her. As winter gave way to spring, Grace divided her time between the millinery shop and preparing for married life. Nathan added a sewing room to the ranch house specifically for her hat making, understanding that she wouldn't want to abandon the business she'd helped build with Martha. "You can design to your heart's content," he told her as he showed her the sun-filled room with built-in cabinets for her supplies. "Martha can still run the shop in town, but you'll have your own space here." "It's perfect," Grace said, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, the desert in full bloom with wildflowers carpeting the usually barren landscape. The small church in Ash Fork was filled to capacity, with ranchers, shopkeepers, and cowboys seated side by side to witness the union. Grace wore a gown of ivory satin that she and Martha had labored over for weeks, with a veil of delicate lace sent by her mother from Boston. As she walked down the aisle on the arm of Sheriff Dawson, who had happily agreed to stand in for her absent father, her eyes found Nathan's, and the love she saw there banished her last lingering doubts. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for their vows, Nathan's voice was steady and sure. "Grace, when you arrived in Ash Fork, I knew my life would never be the same. You brought beauty and purpose to my days, challenged me to be better than I was, and showed me what it means to be truly brave." He squeezed her hands. "I promise to love you faithfully and completely for all my days, to be your partner in joy and sorrow, and to create a home filled with warmth and laughter. Grace blinked back tears as she spoke her own vows. "Nathan, you taught me to trust again when I thought trust was impossible. You waited patiently while I learned to open my heart, never pushing, always supporting." Her voice trembled slightly. "I promise to love you without reservation, to stand by your side through whatever life brings us, and to build our future together with courage and hope." "By the power vested in me," the minister concluded after they exchanged rings, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Nathan's kiss was tender and reverent, sealing their commitment before God and community. As they turned to face their friends, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued at the Eastwood ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and a dance floor constructed beside the barn. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to illuminate the festivities once night fell. A feast of barbecued beef, cornbread, and Martha's famous pies satisfied even the hungriest guest. As Grace circulated among their friends, accepting congratulations and well wishes, she caught sight of Nathan across the yard. He was helping an elderly woman to a seat, his attention fully focused on ensuring her comfort. The simple act of kindness epitomized the man she'd married, strong yet gentle, confident yet humble. "He's a good man," Abigail said, appearing at Grace's side. "The best of men, in fact, and he deserves the happiness you've brought him." "I'm the fortunate one," Grace replied honestly. Abigail squeezed her hand. "You both are. That's what makes it real." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Nathan found his way back to Grace's side. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Eastwood?" he asked, offering his arm. The new name sent a thrill through her. "You may indeed, Mr. Eastwood." They danced beneath the emerging stars, surrounded by the community that had become Grace's family. Martha watched from her seat of honor, wiping away occasional tears of joy. Olivia Taylor caught the bouquet when Grace tossed it, blushing furiously when Sheriff Dawson winked at her. Later, when most guests had departed and only family remained, Nathan led Grace onto the veranda of what was now their home. The night was peaceful, with distant coyotes singing to the moon. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "A year ago, I arrived in Ash Fork convinced that happiness wasn't meant for me, that I would live out my days alone, paying for one mistake. And now," she turned in his arms to face him, "now I understand that life gives second chances to those brave enough to take them. You were my second chance, Nathan." "And you were mine," he said softly, touching her cheek. "I wandered for years after the war, never finding a place that felt like home until I built this ranch. But even then, something was missing." His eyes held hers in the moonlight. "It was you, Grace. You were the missing piece." Their kiss was a promise of love freely given, of trust hard won, of a future built together. Spring turned to summer, and Grace settled into life as Mrs. Nathan Eastwood with surprising ease. She split her time between helping Martha at the shop 3 days a week and establishing their household at the ranch. The transition from boarding house, lodger to mistress of a substantial property, had its challenges. But Grace approached them with the same determination she'd brought to rebuilding her life in Ash Fork. She learned to manage the household staff, a cook, and 2 young women who helped with cleaning and laundry. She planted a vegetable garden beside the house and flower beds beneath the windows. The sewing room became her sanctuary, where she created increasingly sophisticated hat designs that Martha sold to eager customers. Nathan watched her transformation with obvious pride. "You were made for this life," he told her one evening as they sat on the veranda after dinner. "Sometimes I wonder if you conjured this ranch into existence before I ever built it. It suits you so perfectly." Grace laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I never imagined myself as a rancher's wife. In Boston, I was raised to marry a businessman or perhaps a lawyer. Disappointed." He teased, Never, she said firmly, turning to kiss him. This is exactly where I belong. Their happiness seemed complete, yet as autumn approached again, Grace found herself increasingly pensive. Nathan noticed her distraction one morning over breakfast. Something troubling you, love? He asked. Grace set down her coffee cup. I received a letter from my mother yesterday. My father is ill his heart, the doctor says. Nathan reached across the table to take her hand. I'm sorry to hear that. Do you want to go to him? I'm not sure I'd be welcome, she admitted. We didn't part on the best terms. He blamed me for the scandal, said I should have been more cautious. He was wrong, Nathan said firmly. But he's still your father. If you want to go to Boston, we'll go. Oui, she asked, surprised. Did you think I'd let my wife travel across the country alone? His smile was tender. Besides, it's time I met my in-laws. Grace felt a rush of love for this man who continually surprised her with his understanding. What about the ranch? Foreman Jenkins can handle things for a few weeks. That's why I pay him so well. He squeezed her hand. Family comes first, Grace. Always. 3 weeks later, they stood on the doorstep of Grace's childhood home in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The elegant brownstone looked exactly as she remembered it, though she herself had changed immeasurably. Ready? Nathan asked quietly. Grace nodded, lifting the brass knocker. The door opened to reveal her mother, Elizabeth Reynolds, whose face transformed from polite inquiry to shock to joy in the span of seconds. Grace, she cried, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. Oh, my darling girl, you're really here. Over her mother's shoulder, Grace saw her father appear in the hallway, leaning heavily on a cane but very much alive. His face was thinner than she remembered, his hair completely gray now, but his eyes brightened at the sight of her. Father, she said, stepping out of her mother's embrace. John Reynolds approached slowly, his expression unreadable. When he reached her, he simply opened his arms. Grace stepped into his embrace, tears flowing freely as years of hurt and misunderstanding began to heal. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. So sorry, my girl. As am I, she murmured back. After the emotional reunion, Grace introduced Nathan, who immediately charmed her mother with his straightforward manner and obvious devotion to Grace. Her father was more reserved at first, studying his son-in-law with the careful assessment of a businessman. But by the end of dinner, the two men were deep in conversation about cattle markets and railroad expansion, finding common ground in their shared interest in commerce. Your young man is quite impressive, her father commented later when they had a moment alone. A self-made man, I respect that. He's the best man I've ever known, Grace said simply. Her father nodded, patting her hand. I can see that now, and I can see how happy he makes you. He paused, his expression regretful. I should have stood by you after the Smithfield debacle. I was so concerned about appearances, about business connections, that I forgot what truly mattered you, your happiness. It's in the past now, Grace assured him, and it led me to Nathan, so I can't regret it entirely. Nevertheless, I hope you can forgive an old man's failings. She leaned over to kiss his cheek. Already done. Their 2 weeks in Boston passed quickly. Grace showed Nathan her favorite childhood places: the public garden, the bookshops along Washington Street, the harbor where ships arrived from around the world. They attended the theater and dined at fine restaurants, with Grace proudly introducing her husband to former acquaintances. Most received them warmly, though a few of Boston's more rigid matrons maintained a frosty distance. Grace found she no longer cared about their approval. You've changed, her mother observed one afternoon as they took tea in the parlor. You carry yourself differently now. Arizona changes a person, Grace replied, or perhaps it simply reveals who you truly are beneath society's expectations. Elizabeth smiled. Whatever the cause, it suits you. I've never seen you so at peace with yourself. The night before their departure, her father called them into his study. On his desk lay several legal documents. I've been reviewing my affairs, he said without preamble, and I've made some changes to my will. Grace, I've set aside a substantial sum for you, your rightful inheritance, which should have been yours regardless of whom you married. Father, that's not necessary, Grace began. He held up a hand. It is to me. But more importantly, I want to invest in your future. Nathan tells me you're hoping to expand the millinery business. Nathan nodded. Grace's designs have gained quite a following. We've discussed opening a proper shop of her own, separate from her aunt's establishment. Then consider this seed money for that enterprise. John pushed a bank draft across the desk. A belated wedding gift with my blessing. Grace stared at the substantial amount written on the draft. This is too much. It's not enough, her father countered, but it's a start. The journey back to Arizona gave Grace time to process the unexpected reconciliation with her parents. Nathan listened as she sorted through complex emotions, offering perspective when asked, but mostly providing the quiet support she needed. Do you think we did the right thing accepting my father's money? She asked as their train crossed the Mississippi River. We don't need it. Need? No, Nathan agreed. But it means something to your father to contribute to your future. And the money will help you build something that's entirely yours. I already have everything I need, she said, leaning against his shoulder. He kissed the top of her head. Doesn't mean you can't have a few things you want to. Upon their return to Ash Fork, life quickly resumed its familiar rhythm. Grace shared stories of their Boston trip with Martha and Olivia, while Nathan caught up on ranch business with his foreman. Using her father's gift, Grace secured a prime location on Ash Fork's Main Street for her own shop. Grace Eastwood's Fine Millinery. The grand opening was attended by nearly every woman in the county, eager to see the latest designs influenced by Boston fashion, but adapted for Western practicality. The success of the shop cemented Grace's place in the community not just as Nathan Eastwood's wife, but as a businesswoman in her own right. She hired 2 assistants, including a young Apache woman named Nita who showed exceptional skill with needlework, despite raised eyebrows from some townspeople. She's the most talented seamstress I've ever seen, Grace told Nathan when he asked about her choice. I won't overlook that because of prejudice, he smiled proudly. My wife, the revolutionary? Hardly, she demurred. Just practical. Talent is too valuable to waste. By the summer of 1880, nearly 2 years after their wedding, Grace and Nathan had established a life that balanced his ranching responsibilities, her growing business, and their deep connection to each other. The only shadow on their happiness was the absence of children, though neither spoke of it often. One June evening, as they sat on their veranda watching a spectacular sunset paint the desert in fiery hues, Grace took Nathan's hand. I have news, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. Dr. Miller confirmed it this morning. She placed their joined hands over her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, Nathan, in January. For a moment, he seemed frozen, processing her words. Then his face transformed with such pure joy that Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. A baby, he whispered, dropping to his knees before her chair. Our baby. He pressed his lips to her abdomen through her dress, then looked up at her with eyes shining. Are you happy, love? Happier than I ever dreamed possible, she answered truthfully, cradling his face in her hands. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall, with Grace maintaining limited hours at her shop while Martha and the assistants handled most of the work. Nathan hovered attentively, much to Grace's mingled amusement and exasperation. I'm with child, not made of porcelain, she reminded him when he insisted on carrying her up the porch steps. Humor me, he replied, kissing her nose. I've waited a lifetime for this family. I intend to treasure every moment. Their son, Samuel John Eastwood, arrived on a cold January night in 1881, with Martha and Dr. Miller attending the birth. Nathan paced the hallway outside their bedroom until Martha finally opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. Come meet your son, she said, stepping aside. The sight of Grace, exhausted but radiant, holding their tiny son against her breast, was one Nathan would never forget. He approached the bed cautiously, overwhelmed by the rush of love for these two people who represented his entire world. "He's perfect," he whispered, touching the baby's downy head with reverent fingers. "Do you want to hold him?" Grace asked. Nathan's hands trembled as he accepted the swaddled bundle, cradling his son close to his chest. "Hello, Samuel," he murmured. "I'm your papa." The baby's eyes, still the unfocused blue of newborns, seemed to look directly into his father's soul. Nathan felt his heart expand almost painfully with the force of his love. "Thank you," he said to Grace, his voice thick with emotion, "for our son, for our life together, for believing in second chances." She reached for his hand, squeezing it weakly. "Thank you for waiting for me, for seeing something in that wary Boston girl that even she couldn't see in herself." Nathan leaned down to kiss her, their son nestled between them. "I'd have waited forever," he said simply. "You were worth waiting for." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler to little boy, the Eastwood household expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Elizabeth Martha, in 1883. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, with Samuel showing his father's affinity for horses and Elizabeth revealing her mother's artistic talents from an early age. Grace continued to run her millinery shop, though she scaled back her hours to prioritize family life. Her designs became known throughout the territory, even earning mention in a San Francisco newspaper's fashion column. Nathan expanded the ranch's operations, breeding horses alongside the cattle business. By 1885, Eastwood Ranch was one of the most successful operations in northern Arizona. Martha, now in her 70s, retired from active hat-making but kept her shop open with the help of Grace's former assistants, who had become skilled milliners in their own right. She doted on her great-niece and nephew, spoiling them with treats whenever they came to town. On a warm spring evening in 1890, 12 years after Grace had first stepped off the stagecoach in Ash Fork, she and Nathan sat on their veranda, watching 7-year-old Elizabeth chase her brother across the yard. "I received a letter from my mother today," Grace said, breaking their companionable silence. "She and Father are thinking of visiting in the fall." "That would be wonderful," Nathan replied. "The children would love to see their grandparents again." "I never imagined this life," Grace mused, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "When I left Boston, I thought I was leaving everything behind: family, prospects, happiness itself. And instead," she looked out at their children, their home, the life they'd built together. "Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted: a true partner, a purpose, a place to belong." Nathan took her hand, running his thumb across the gold band he'd placed there years earlier. "Do you remember what I said to you that day by the stream?" She smiled, the memory still clear after all this time. "You said you'd been waiting your whole life to find someone like me." "It was true then," he said softly, "and it's truer now. Every day with you, Grace Eastwood, has been a gift I never thought to deserve." She turned to face him, this man who had patiently waited for her to heal, to trust, to love again. The years had added a touch of silver to his temples and fine lines around his eyes, but he was more handsome to her now than when they'd first met, because now she saw not just his face but his heart, his steadfastness, his unwavering devotion. "I love you, Nathan," she said simply. "More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the desert in gold and purple, Nathan pulled his wife close. Their children's laughter echoed across the yard, a joyful soundtrack to the life they'd created together. "I would wait another lifetime for this," he whispered against her hair. "For you, for us." And Grace, who had once believed no man would ever truly wait for her, nestled into the arms of the one who had done exactly that.